Okay. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of CRiT as well as School of Hospitality, Tourism and Events of Taylor's University for all the participants who have taken their time despite the busy schedule to join this wonderful CRiT webinar, which is on experimental research in tourism and hospitality, fundamentals, design and writing. So before we go to the webinar's information very quickly, so the webinar where we are, the webinar is mainly hosted from Malaysia, which is at Taylor's University. A very quick summary of Taylor's University and also picture who have not been to our campus. And the CRiT, just a very quick background about CRiT. What is the focus of the CRiT is going to be the reference center in national in 1 year time and Asian level 3 years, mainly focusing on tourism and sustainable development goals. That is our vision for 3 years. And the 4 pillars of the CRiT is the research, consultation and networking, human capital development and community engagement. So we are purely focused only on the SDG from a tourism perspective. And today's webinar is also in association with the School of Hospitality, Tourism and Events of Taylor's University. So which is number 16 world ranking and number 2 in Asia ranking and number 1 in Malaysia. So this all happens because of great support from each and every stakeholders. And we do have a world-class facilities, just a very quick facilities. And let's go to today's main focus. So let me quickly introduce our speaker. So today we have Dr. Lawrence Fong, an associate professor from Faculty of Business Administration, a Center for Cognitive and Brain Sciences, University of Macau. So first of all, I would like we from Taylor's, CRiT and SHT, we would like to sincerely take this opportunity to thank Prof. Dr. Lawrence for accepting our invitation. And it is always a pleasure to have you on our CRiT webinar. Despite your busy schedule, we really appreciate your time as well as you are going to share a valuable insight. So those who don't know about Dr. Lawrence is an associate professor and also who's well known in the experimental research. He's serving on editorial board for almost 11 international peer-reviewed journals, including Journal of Hospitality Tourism Research, then Hospitality Management, International Journal of Contemporary Hospitality Management, and additionally, he also been well-known speaker and also recently is also engaged with APACRI. And he published mostly in top-tier journals such as Tourism Management, Annals of Tourism Research, Journal of Travel Research, International Journal of Hospitality Management, and International Journal of Contemporary Hospitality Management, and many more Q1 and Q2 and all journals, which is highly recognized globally. So today we have with us Prof. Lawrence. Please pay attention during his sharing, and we will take all the questions after his sharing session at the end of the session. So, but you can always post your questions in the chat. So we will take the question from the chat at the end of the session. So without further ado, let me hand over the virtual stage to Prof. Lawrence.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so, all right. So thank you so much for your introduction about myself, Kendapan, and also the invitation of Mustafa and also CRiT, right? Yeah, so actually I just share my screen. I think you can see my screen, all right? I'm really happy to have this chance, this opportunity to share some of my knowledge related to experimental design. And I really look forward to the interaction with you, the audience, and also the honorable guest, right? So, all right. So you can see here today, the topic of my presentation is experimental research in tourism and hospitality, fundamentals, design, and writing. All right, so in this presentation, I will walk you through something about my insights related to experimental design, and then the fundamentals of experimental design, because I'm not sure whether all the audience are familiar with this kind of research method or not, but I will start from some of the basic principles in experimental design. And after that, I will explain something about the critical review of the experimental design in tourism and hospitality research. And eventually, I will give an example of writing an experimental design paper. Okay. So these are something that I would like to cover today. So first of all, my insights. Actually, if people ask me why I would like to do experimental research, I think this is one of the reasons, right? This is actually a Nobel Prize winner in 2015. It's a Chinese female researcher who's called Yo Tu, right? And to me, she is a highly respectful person, because actually some people may say, oh, isn't it because she's a Chinese? Because I'm also a Chinese as well. No, this is not the major reason for me to respect her. And isn't it because she's a female winner, female Nobel Prize winner? This is also not the reason. Isn't it because she's the first Chinese winner in physiology and also in medicine, because she won the Nobel Prize in medicine? This is also not the reason. Isn't it because of her achievement in discovering the novel therapy against the malaria? This is why she got the Nobel Prize. But also, this is not the reason. Then what's the reason? The reason is she tests her medicine on herself to ensure that it was safe. So this is the reason why I find she's so respectful. She started the experiment by testing the medicine using herself, her body, actually. Yeah, so that's also the reason why I really respect her. And then it's also inspiring that, of course, I'm not doing the medicine design research. I mainly do the tourism and also hospitality research, but I think I am also a customer as well. I can do the experiment by myself whenever I have any ideas, and then I can try to test by myself and see whether it works to me or not. Yeah, so that's why, of course, I can't compare with her, because not only because she's a Nobel Prize winner, but she really tests her medicine on herself. Yeah. All right. So to start the experimental research, most of the time, how can I come up with the ideas? No matter what kind of research methods we are adopting, probably we will try to do some observation in our daily life, especially if we are a hospitality and tourism researcher, and then we can experience those hotel surveys or airline or restaurant, and then we can have some observation. We can do the observation every day. And in the meantime, we can try to ask why it happens. Whenever we have the answer of why, and then probably we will be able to identify the independent variable in the experimental design. And most of the time, I will also try to apply the theories to my daily life as well. Whenever I have some observations, right? Yeah, whenever I have some observations, and then I will try to I will try to recall my memory about what kind of theories that can be used to explain a phenomenon that I observe, right? So, and then this kind of theories is very important, especially when we are going to design the experiment, because we really need a theory to support the hypothesis that we are going to test using experimental design. So once I have an idea, once I have a hypothesis in mind, and then it's the time for me to test by myself. First of all, is to mentally test it. That means trying to think experimentally, see whether it makes sense or not, or whether it works or not from my perspective. But I'm only one of the consumers. Actually, when we are doing research, we really need to find something which can be applicable to most of the people in the world or in the population. Then they are usually the general population, and because we are focusing on like marketing, then will be the general consumers. Then what I will do is, to me, is very easy, because I just simply discuss it with my wife. because my wife actually is a kind of general consumer, because it may work to me, but it may not work to her. All right, some of the research idea, especially because there may be gender difference. And in the meantime, actually, I'm actually not good at shopping. My wife is better. All right, that's why I better ask her whether my hypothesis makes sense or not. But of course, all these indicates that actually I really feel passionate with experimental design. Yeah, because it becomes part of my life, part of my daily life. Yeah, I will do an observation, think experimentally, talk to those general consumers every day whenever ideas come up in my life. All right, I just share something about myself, why I want to do experimental research, and then how I did it, how I come up with ideas. And now it's time to go to the fundamentals of experimental design. So first of all, what is experiment? This is a definition by Shadis and colleagues, right? A study in which an intervention is deliberately introduced to observe its effect, right? So experimental design, usually what we would do is trying to test a causal effect. If we use survey or cross-sectional design, probably we cannot do it. But experimental design has the advantage of doing this so that it can test the causal effect. But the causal effect means something influence or cause the results of another. All right. So what would be the cause? What would be the results? The cause actually is through our intervention. So when we are going to design an experiment, usually we can do it in different settings, what we call research settings. Right? We can do it in a lab like this, all right, and or in the field. For example, this one is a hotel lobby, one of the hotel in Macau, right? That means we can test it in an environment here, which is highly controlled. In the lab setting, usually in this environment, we would not have a lot of distraction because for the participants, they will just stay at their place and try to complete the experiment. They will not be distracted by the other things. And all of them actually are staying in the same settings, right? So in the lab settings, that's why it has a what we call a high internal validity, because we can try to control or as many as possible the other variables which may influence the results, right? But probably the problem of this kind of setting is if you are going to do an experiment related to hotel, of course, this is not a hotel, then there will be problem in terms of external validity. So that's why it will be better in this case to do it in a real hotel like this, all right, for example, in the lobby. But the problem is if we're going to do the experiment in the lobby, then every participant may be affected by the environment or by the other customers at the lobby. So in this case, it will also affect the validity of the results. So that's why there's always a give and take, no matter you do lab or the field settings. Right? Of course, the ideal situation is we better use multiple studies, one in lab, one in field, which is very common in the marketing studies. I just mentioned about the definition of the experiment. We need an intervention, or we can think like usually we have an independent variable to affect the dependent variable. Then for the in the survey, usually we'll have the scale to measure them. But in the experiment, for the independent variable, we will do manipulation. All right, we'll try to manipulate it. Okay, that's why we have this term in experimental design. Okay, manipulation is we try to have different conditions and put the participants in these conditions and see how they respond, okay, which is the dependent variable. Okay, for the manipulation, usually we have a general term called control and treatment condition. Right? So control condition is something the control condition and treatment condition actually they are different just in one way. It depends on the kind of independent variable you are manipulating. Right? Whenever you want to do the manipulation, and we better pretest it before we really go for the main study. All right. So here I just want to give you an example. Okay. For example, like this. Okay, this is actually, you can see this one like a coupon, all right, a coupon for the potential customers. Okay, let's say, for example, hotels.com send you a coupon like this. All right, whenever you make the booking, and then you can save 8%, okay, a discount of 8%. All right, and then in this situation, you can see one is the control condition, another one is the treatment condition. Then what's the major difference between these two? Is the message here. All right, here for this study, let's say we would like to test the effect of exclusiveness on using a coupon. All right, exclusiveness can be something like an independent variable. Using the coupon would be the dependent variable. When you see this coupon, whether you will use this coupon or not, okay, and this is something that we want to test. Okay, so exclusiveness, how can I manipulate it? For example, in the control condition, here, let's say coupon for our customers. It seems that this is for all of their customers, which is not exclusive. All right. But in the treatment condition, we will try to put exclusiveness here, which is like coupon for selective customers. That means you are one of the selective customers who receive this coupon. This is exclusive to you. All right. This is a typical way like how we try to manipulate a situation. Okay. For example, if we manipulate exclusiveness, and then for the exclusive coupon, we will put it as a treatment condition. That means another one without any exclusiveness would be the control condition. This is an example. If you have the experience of doing survey, okay, survey, that means people will try to answer the measurement, respond to the measurement item. Usually we have to check like the reliability, validity of the measures, right? Here in the experiment, because we are using manipulation, we also need to do a similar procedure, which is to check something like the validity of the design. This is what we call the manipulation check. We have to check whether our manipulation is successful or not. Okay. For example, using the same example here, okay, the coupon. How can we do the manipulation check? We can just simply ask the respondents, for example, the coupon is available to, whether it is available to very few customers or many customers. All right. Usually we ask this question after we ask the dependent variable. That means after we ask the question of whether you want to use this coupon or not, and then we will try to ask whether this coupon is available to very few customers or many customers. Why we ask this question? Because we want to generate a mean. Okay, for example, in this situation, because this is exclusive situation, in this situation, we suppose the participants would say that this coupon is only available to very few customers because it should be for selective customers. So in this case, the mean to answer this question should be close to 1. Like here, for example, 2.28. For the control condition, that means the answer should be go near to 9. Here in this situation is 5.12. If we look at these two mean values, then we can find that in the control condition, the mean value is significantly higher than the treatment value. Of course, we have to do the statistical test as well. All right. In order, if it is the case, that means manipulation is successful. Okay? That means we want to manipulate exclusiveness according to their answers and statistical results. That's correct. That means the manipulation is successful. Now, let us go to a more complicated example, right? Here we have 4 coupons, but what you can see here is we have more than 1 independent variables. Just now, when in the previous example, I mentioned that the independent variable is exclusiveness. Now, I add 1 more independent variable, which is saving. How much you save? If you look at these 4 coupons, you can see the upper 2 coupons, 8% off. The bottom one, 18% off. That means more saving at the bottom. So that's how we try to manipulate the savings. Okay, higher savings or lower savings. okay, and exclusiveness is the same, the manipulation. Okay, so in this situation, you can see this is what we call the factorial design because we have more than one manipulated variables. And this is a typical case of, we call it 2x2 design. Why 2x2? 2 here, okay, which is, you can see 2 here and 2 here, right? 2x2. The 2 means, that means exclusiveness. We have 2 conditions. For saving, we also have 2 conditions. That's why if we multiply them together, we will have 4 conditions. Okay, here are the situations or the conditions, the 4 conditions, right? For example, this one, no exclusiveness because coupon for all our customers, plus no discount. Okay, so following the same logic, this one is with exclusiveness plus low discount. This one is no exclusiveness plus high discount. And the last one is exclusiveness plus high discount. Okay, based on these 4 coupons, it seems that if I am the customers, seems that this one should be better. All right, because this is exclusive to me and the amount that I can save is the highest, right? Usually that's the hypothesis, but sometimes the results can be different. That's the most interesting part. All right, when again, manipulation check. Now we have 2 variables, 2 manipulated variables. How can we do the manipulation check? Okay, this is how we can do it. Okay, exclusiveness. Again, we will ask one question. Savings, we'll ask another question, which is the saving by using this coupon is very low or very high. In the 18% off condition, I will assume that the participants will give a mean value, which is close to 9. And in the situation of 8% discount, and then I will expect the mean value close to 1. And there will be a significant difference. Okay, then it means that the manipulation check is successful. Okay, but in the 2x2 design, usually when we do the manipulation check, it is more complicated. Okay, first of all, for example, let us check whether the manipulation of exclusiveness is successful or not. First of all, we have to make sure that exclusiveness is higher in the exclusive condition than that of non-exclusive condition. But the savings, actually, in both conditions, the savings should not be affected. And their interaction should also not be significant. What does it mean? Why do we need to do that? The reason is, now we have 2 manipulations. One of them is manipulating exclusiveness. Another one is manipulating savings. Okay, we want to make sure that when we manipulate exclusiveness, okay, people can really distinguish this from savings. That means when you are manipulating exclusiveness, you are actually not affecting people's response to savings. All right, that's the reason why we have to go through these more complicated procedures. Okay, so actually, for the manipulation check for savings, we have to do the same. And how can we do that? Usually we use the 2x2 and over. For manipulation, I just mentioned that we can use the coupon, all right, which is one of the examples, okay? And usually we call it a scenario based. That means assuming that now you received a coupon like this, all right? So this is a scenario based, okay? But there are also some other way to do the manipulation if the concept is different, okay? For example, like priming. Priming actually is the kind of manipulation which is always used in marketing research and psychology research. Okay? One way is to do episodic recall. That means, for example, what? Usually for this kind of manipulation, the experimenter will ask the participants to recall an event or a situation in their life, all right? So as to make that concept salient in their mind, all right? For example, let's say power is one of the concepts. Okay, if people want to manipulate power, manipulate so that the participants will feel powerful, how would they ask them to do? We ask the participants to recall an event that they feel powerful. Or if they want them to feel powerless, ask them to record an event in their daily life that they feel powerless. This is episodal recall. Another way is visual priming. Okay, give something to the participant to see, and then they will have that kind of feeling. For example, if you want people to feel comfortable, you may want to give a blue sky with the clouds, all right? And then if you want people to be sensitive to price, people may give the color like green color with pennies, all right? Another way is called semantic priming. One of the research use the numbers to elicit, to trigger the feeling of lucky, okay, which is in the marketing, okay? Because they did it in China, because in China, 8 actually is the lucky number, 4 is an unlucky number. So they just ask people to keep reading those number 8, digit 8, all right, in the lucky situation. And unlucky situation, ask the participants to read number 4, all right? So once they finish reading those numbers, then priming will trigger their lucky or unlucky feeling. It's amazing, right? When we are doing the experiment, actually, because we know now experiment, we have different conditions, right? We have control condition, we have treatment conditions, and how can we decide which participants going to control condition and which participants going to treatment condition? All right. Usually it depends on the kind of design you adopt and also how you are going to assign the participants to the condition. One way, a very common way is called random assignment. Okay. For example, we have control condition and treatment condition, and we have a pool of 100 participants. Then in this situation, we will randomly assign these participants either to control condition or the treatment conditions. So that means for every participants, they will only be in one of the conditions. Okay, this is what we call random assignment. Okay? Random assignment is highly important. The reason is if we do not do the random assignment, people may think that it's because of the characteristics of the participants in the condition that affect the results, but not because of your manipulation. Once we have the random assignment, and then we can rule out this kind of criticism. And some people may say gender can be one of the variables which affect the results. For example, if let's say in the control condition, most of the participants, they are female. In the treatment condition, most of the participants, they are male. And then how can you make a conclusion that this is based on your manipulation? This is not based on the gender difference. So in this case, that's also the reason why we need random assignment. But sometimes people will adopt another approach called matching. Okay? Matching is what? Here, that means the experimenter will intentionally determine the distribution, okay, of the gender of the condition. For example, in the control condition, one of the conditions, we have half of the participants are male, another half are female. The second condition, similar, all right? So in these situations, if we try to do the matching based on gender, at least we can rule out the argument that the results are biased by gender, because we try to control the distribution of the gender. This is what we call the matching. Another approach when you are going to assign the participants to the experimental conditions. Random assignment is highly important, okay, because if you use random assignment, then we can say this is a true experiment. But if you are not using random assignment, you can only say this is a quasi experiment. Right? That means this is not purely true, right? But still, some of the research, they will use quasi experiment, especially if they conduct the experiment in the field. I just mentioned about random assignment. It goes with another concept called between subject design. Okay, between subject design is what? it means that for this kind of design, every single participant, they will be exposed to only one of the conditions. They will not be exposed to multiple conditions in the experiment. Okay, so that means if a person assigned to condition 1, okay, he will not be assigned to condition 2. That means if one person is in the control condition, he will not be in the treatment condition. This is the between subject design. Okay, the good things actually, because when we use random assignment, actually it will be easy for us to implement, okay, and ensure the validity of the results. And this is really a true experiment. But there is also a problem with this kind of design. For example, as I mentioned, there may be the individual difference. It may be because of the gender that bias the results, all right? So that's why some people would use within subject design, which is another way, within subject. What does it mean? That means for every single participant, they will be exposed to all of the conditions. That means both the control condition and the treatment condition. Then you can imagine that that person needs to attend both conditions. It will take longer time for him to complete the experiment. And this person will feel tired, all right? There will be some fatigue effect, right? And also, if he is in condition 1, the effect that he gets may be carry over to the condition 2. So in this case, it will also bias the results, which is what we call the carryover effect. So in general, for experimental design, we have 2 major designs. One is the between subject and one is the within subject. All right. Both of them have pros and cons. But in general, based on my observation, most of the studies would do between subject design. Okay. Sample size. When we talk about survey, most of the time we want to have a sample size of 300, 400, 500, or even 1,000. All right, but how about experimental design? Usually, the number of participants is much smaller. Yeah, according to some of the common practice. Okay, and then someone would say, even the number of smaller, okay, we still need to set a minimum. All right, someone would claim that at least 30 per condition. Okay, that means because usually in experiment we have at least 2 conditions, right? One is control condition, another one is treatment. For every condition, here Lin and Lin recommend at least 30. All right, that means 60. Okay, 60 is still a small number if we compare to 300 and 500, right? Okay, but can we just say that 30, 60, okay, is too arbitrary, right? So a better approach is we better do the power analysis in order to determine the sufficient sample size for the experiment. Okay, power analysis, I'm not going to explain in detail, but you can try to check about it. And there are some software, a software which is called G-Power, which is very useful for you to do the power analysis. So for the samples, for doing experiment, if you check the marking paper, most of them actually, the participants, they are the students. Okay, and then so that's why generalization of the effect actually would be problematic. All right, tourism and hospitality research usually they expect to have participants from the general population. Then that is always an issue. It's really that some of the journals they would just reject a paper because the sample size is purely students. Okay, so in this case, what we can do is, of course, the ideal situation is we have one study for recruiting students and other studies for recruiting those general populations. All right, to recruit general populations, can we do it online? Because online actually is very common nowadays. Yes, all right, online experiment is possible. But remember, there is one issue with online experiment. Okay, because the environment of every individual participant when they are completing this experiment actually is different. Because for example, they all did it at their home. Their home's environment, they are totally different. But if I just put them in a classroom, the environment is the same. Again, it will affect the internal validity, all right? In experimental design, we can also include some control variables, or we call it covariates. For example, like personality is some of the common variables people always put. Gender, age, they are most common covariates, right? And then how can we determine what kind of covariate should be included? There is a recommendation that if the covariate actually is strongly correlated to the dependent variable, like the R greater than 0.2, and then we may need to include it as a control variables. And also the control variables or the covariates should not interact with the manipulated variables when they are going to influence the DV. Okay. Usually when we would ask the questions related to the control variables, we will ask them before we do the manipulation. Why? Because we do not want our manipulation affect the answers to those covariates. What kind of analysis will we usually do? Okay, in experimental design, because the design actually is trying to compare two different conditions. Sometimes t-test and ANOVA will be good enough. All right. Would people use SEM? It's possible, but I would say actually it's rare. Okay, especially because of some limitation of SEM, especially if you use covariance-based SEM, is hardly possible. All right, but if you are using PRS SEM because there's less restriction on the variable, that may be possible. Okay, and then the use of the process, this one actually is more common in experimental design. If you check those marketing journals and also tourism hospitality journals, for those you doing experimental design, they would tend to use this process software or add-ons. Okay, this is free of charge. If you have SPSS, you just download the process and install it in SPSS, then you can run it. Okay, it is mainly used to run what? To run the mediation and moderation effect. If your conceptual model has moderator or mediator, I would strongly recommend you to use process if you are doing experimental design. Okay, now I would like to show you some of my observations in the tourism and hospitality research. All right, this kind of review actually was done a couple of years ago, but still some of the phenomenon still exists based on my observation nowadays, especially when I review the papers. So first of all, experimental design was underutilized. Okay, in these 2 years, what I find actually is the number of experimental design research in hospitality and tourism keep growing, and it's growing fast. Right, so this actually argument probably is true a few years ago, but nowadays it's different. And indeed, some of the other researchers, they also recommend the tourism and hospitality researchers to use experiment to complete their study. And you can see here, actually, is here are some of my observations, okay, based on review, all right, some years ago, okay. So you can see here is related to those experimental articles in tourism. Here is I and also the co-authors trying to download those articles from the tourism and hospitality, and also trying to see those experimental research papers, some of their characteristics. For example, like this, okay, in the articles, how many studies they have conducted, all right, you know, for the experiment, for that paper, all right. And here you can see some years ago, all right, at that time, most of the articles, they only have one study, all right, one experimental study, all right. And then around, that means 83 or 84%, no matter in tourism or e-tourism articles, right? And then around 12% would have 2 studies. I think there's a trend right now here in our tourism and hospitality field that when you read the paper, many papers, they will have more than 1 study. If you are doing experimental design, it's even more common to have more than 1 studies nowadays. Okay? But some years ago, all right, just less than 10 years ago, that kind of phenomenon is, I mean, multiple studies was not popular. So with only 1 study, actually people may question the robustness of the conclusion, all right? And they will also try to raise some of the other explanations of the results. So that's also the reason why we have to do multiple studies, okay, in experimental design. So if we are suggested to do multiple studies, then how many should we do? All right, to me, actually, there is no answer. All right. It depends on whether the number of the studies that you conducted can achieve the research goals of your papers or not. All right. And another thing nowadays is we can see people are trying to use mixed method. All right. Experiment actually is one of the methods. But in the meantime, we can also use some other methods in the same paper. Okay. For example, a survey plus experiment, or experiment plus the big data analysis, which I conducted recently. All right. This is one of my papers. Here we try to, first of all, we start from a big data analysis of the online reviews. And then once we find the phenomenon, and then we really want to find the causal relationship, that's the reason why in study 2, we try to initiate an experiment. Okay? So again, the most important thing is when we are going to choose the method, actually, we have to make sure that it can achieve the goal of our research. All right. Regarding the lab and the field, probably now you know what is the lab and also the field study setting. That's the research settings. Okay. Here in tourism, what we can see is it seems that lab here in tourism, about almost half of the papers they will use lab, and the other half will use field. For e-tourism, more papers will use lab than field. All right. And what I want to tell is, in marketing, you will find that in marketing journals, you will find that most of the studies, they will do it in the lab. All right, most. But nowadays, they try to use a mixed approach. All right. And then, but in tourism, because we are more focusing on the implications for the practitioners, so that doing experiment in the field probably is even more important. All right. And so that's why for the tourism, here you can see even more studies, more experimental study was conducted in the field, right? But for the e-tourism, it's different. The reason probably is because of the context itself. E-tourism is related to the online environment. If we do it online, probably we can say this is a field already. Okay? And the issues actually for having the field experiment actually is most of the time in the field, it is difficult for us to do random assignment, so that it is hard for us to do the true experiment. And then to do the experiment in the field, internal validity will be an issue. All right. And in the meantime, most of the time, we cannot ask too many questions to the participants in the field, because usually we just really want to make it real. All right. So in this situation, it is hard for us to understand the psychological underpinnings, okay, between the independent variable and also the dependent variable. That means the mechanism. Okay, so that most of the time, if we want to understand the mechanism, we better do it in the lab. Okay, and then try to ask the participants to answer as many questions as possible, which are related to that research. But anyway, lab plus field is always recommended. For the design, okay, whether they use factorial design or not, all right, or they just have one independent variable, okay, what you can see here is it seems that for tourism research, most of them would have one variable, all right, but for the e-tourism research, they are more likely to use the two independent variables, okay, which is a factorial design, okay, and then you can see we're having three independent variables. Actually, the situation, the conditions actually is quite rare, but that's true. Having three independent variables, the problem is it will be very, very difficult to interpret the results. All right. And also with more independent variables, the more participants you will need. Okay. This is also practically another issue as well. So that's why it's good to have the factorial design, because we can examine something like the moderating effects, but we better not to have too many independent variables, or we better not to manipulate too many independent variables. Okay, the maximum, my suggestion is 3 manipulated variables. Don't have 4 or 5 or more. Otherwise, it would be almost impossible for you to interpret the results. Okay, how about the method? What they usually use, scenario-based, because hospitality and also tourism, actually, they are more focusing on the the practical implication as well, okay, in addition to theoretical implications. So that's why scenario-based would make more sense, right? And another thing is, for scenario-based, there is one major issue because this is not real. Scenario, usually we just ask the participants to imagine, okay? They are in that condition, okay? So the imagination may not be reliable, okay? For example, if you want them to feel happy or unhappy just through the manipulation, sometimes it's not easy, especially the emotion is hard to be imagined, all right? Through imaginations, then it's hard for you to feel happy just through that, right? Because imagination is related to cognitive process, okay? And another thing is doing experiment, most of the time, we just measure the dependent variable using intention, okay, which is not the actual behavior, right? So it would be good, yeah, if we can try to record the actual behavior in the field, or if we try to do the experiment in the lab, we also need to do what? We need to increase the realism, all right? That means make it real, okay? Realism is something which is always recommended, even in the consumer research. Okay, this is a diagram drawn from a paper, okay, in the Journal of Consumer Research. Okay, here I'm not going to go through the detail about this diagram, all right, but you can refer to this paper, all right. But no matter how, when we are going to do the design, the most important thing is that the research method, okay, is aligning with the research overarching goals, all right? As I always mention, as long as your design can achieve the goals of the research, that's the most important thing, right? When you are going to design your experiment. And here is another example which probably people may criticize, the realism, all right? For example, this is the need for uniqueness, which is a concept, okay? When we are going to manipulate it, there's one suggestion is trying to use this kind of method. All right, we want you to feel a low need for uniqueness, all right, and then the participant will be asked to count the number of circles and squares in this situation. And then for the high need for uniqueness will be like this. What you can see the difference is what? Here is a sequence of circle, a sequence of square. But here, actually, you can see the square and the circle in between the other shapes, all right, because according to the researchers, this is a kind of priming way. Actually, by reading this sequence of consecutive circles or squares, people will have a lower need for uniqueness. Anyway, in our daily life, how can we apply that? All right, that's also what I want to mention about our manipulation, how real it is. All right, so that whenever we are doing experimental design, like in tourism and hospitality, we also need to think about whether it can be applicable in the industry. Manipulation check. Some years ago, I find there is a major issue, which is when people do the experiment, they even haven't reported the manipulation check. Right? If you look at the statistics here, that's the situation, okay, which is really, I mean in the tourism and papers. So this is really problematic, all right? So that's why being a reviewer, all right, or if you're the researcher, make sure that you will also do the manipulation check and also report the manipulation check results, all right? Because otherwise, the validity of the manipulation will be in doubt, all right? And realism of the response will also be in doubt as well. Reviewers need to do the gatekeeper, make sure that when they review the paper, the authors really did the manipulation check, right? And sometimes when we do the manipulation check, actually, there are different ways, right? As I demonstrated before, you can simply ask a question to do it. Or some of the other way is nowadays, because we have many wearable devices, we can even measure, all right, their physiological reactions, all right? It becomes a trend nowadays. Okay, for example, like if you want to manipulate a person's emotion and you want to check whether they have that kind of emotion or not, and probably you can use some of the wearable device, or can be used like the watch, okay, to measure it. All right, and then regarding the samples, all right, usually here you can see most of the design they use between subject design. This is also the practice that I always use. All right, in terms of the sample size, what I can observe is in tourism research, the sample size is usually larger, right? So as I mentioned before, if you want to determine the sample size, power analysis, or maybe 30 participants per condition, and then will be recommended. And some people even suggest a more stringent requirement, which is at least 50. Analysis, most of them will use t-test and over. Okay, this is some of the observation, but again, my suggestion is trying to use process. Okay. The last topic that I would like to share, I think I have to speed up, right? Because time. So it's writing. Okay, writing. I will try to use one of the example from my paper with my co-authors to demonstrate, to illustrate about how to write the experimental design paper, research paper, right? So this is an example, okay, which is a paper conducted by me and also my co-authors. Okay. This is again related to the Q point. Okay. First of all, actually, we start from a research problem, all right, of something about offering the monetary savings in Q point. Usually, it's costly, all right. If we let the consumer save money, sometimes it's, of course, it's a cost to the suppliers, right? And then we would like to know, is there any other way, okay, to give a coupon which is valuable from the consumer's perspective, but in the meantime, the cost will be lower. All right, this is the question in our mind. This is what we want to do, but I'm not going to go through the detail about this paper. If you're interested in it, you're welcome to read the paper, okay? And instead, I would like to, all right, go to the, the design, all right? So we have several hypotheses. All right, hypothesis 1, okay, and then 2. The second hypothesis is a 2x2 design. All right. The third hypothesis actually is more complicated because we have 2x2 design plus one more independent variable, which is a three-way interaction. All right. So I just go straight to this model. Probably it will be easier for you to understand what we examine. All right, you can see here, this is the hypothesis. This is conceptual model. We have 3 hypotheses. One of them is the independent variable affecting a mediator, and then the dependent variable. All right, and then another one actually is this one actually is a moderator. Okay, a moderated mediation. Okay, and then the third hypothesis is even more complicated because which is a conditional moderation, because this path is moderating another moderation. All right, this is more complicated, but anyway, okay, what I want to show, because it's writing. All right, so that's why I just want to be more focused on here. When we are writing the results, or when we are writing the method section and the result section of a experimental research paper, then usually what sections will be included? What kind of information should be reported? Here is one of the examples. Okay. Okay. So first of all, because for this paper, we have done 3 studies, multiple studies. Okay. Study 1. Okay. This is study 1. Okay. So first of all, the subsection is we have to tell who are the participants. Okay. Here we use a student sample. Okay. And then we have to tell whether this is in the lab or in the field. This is a control environment, which was conducted in the lab. And we use random assignment. And then how many conditions? 2 conditions. For each condition, 30 samples. Okay. And then we try to explain what are the procedures. We use scenario-based experimental design. We ask them to imagine something. All right. So that's why I highlight imagine here. This is the scenario. Okay. And then, so because this is related to Q point, all right, and then in this part, we're trying to explain how we're going to manipulate the independent variable in the Q point, all right? So usually for the first section, we will focus on who are the participants and what are the procedures that we use in order to do this experiment. And then I will also show them the manipulation because it's a Q point. All right, for example, here, condition 1, and here, condition 2. This is the control condition. This one is the treatment condition. Okay. After that, the second subsection is the measures. We will tell the readers about where we get the measures. For example, we have one of the mediator is attitude, okay, and then how we measure it. How about the dependent variable, intention? How we measure it? Where are they from? And do we have any control variables or not? If yes, we have to tell them what it is and also how we measure it. Okay. And here are some of the control variables. Okay. And when we try to include the control variables, we also need to explain why they have to be included conceptually, right? Then after that, we have to report the results. In the results part, first of all, what we have to do is trying to report the manipulation check results. All right. So this is the results about the manipulation check showing that this manipulation is successful. All right. And in the meantime, because we use multiple items to measure attitude and intention and the covariance called proneness, so we also need to report the compressed alpha related to reliability. And we also need to tell what analysis we did. All right. If you use process, as I mentioned before, all right, we have to report, we use process. Process has many, many models. Then which model you have used to analyze the results, okay, you have to report it. And also the bootstrapping as well. Because we also do some syntax customization in order to examine our model so that we also report it here. Okay, and then after that would be the results. Okay, we have to tell them the direct effect is significant or not, and also indirect effect is significant or not. This is related to the results of hypothesis testing. Okay. After that, we will usually have a subsection related to the discussion. We have conducted study 1. We have the findings. Then we have to discuss the findings of study 1. In the meantime, through this discussion, we can point out why we need to do study 2. We have to tell the reasons why. This is what I want to highlight here. Okay. So that's why we initiate study 2, which is another experiment. So study 2, and then you can, again, we start from participants and procedures. Okay, this is about the study 2. In study 2, this time we use the 2x2 pictorial design. All right, so here are the Q points. Okay, similarly, we have the second subsection about the measures. Because we are going to test the similar dependent variable, so that here we have not detailedly report where the measures from. We don't need to do it. Probably we just ask the readers to refer to study 1 about the measures of intention, attitude. All right. Then we have to report the results, again, manipulation check results. All right. And also compressed alpha, as well as the hypothesis testing results here. Okay. Because we use 2x2 design, it will be better for us to illustrate the results like this, using a diagram like this. All right, so that people, when they read this diagram, then they can easily understand the results. Okay. After that, we'll have another discussion about the results of study 2. Okay. And in the meantime, if possible, we can also try to combine this discussion with the insights drawing from study 1. Okay. And more importantly, here, because we have study 3, all right, and then we also need to provide the reasons why we need to initiate study 3. Study 3 is more complicated, okay, because we have one more moderator, all right. But again, in terms of writing, we first of all start from participants and procedures. All right, because the participants and procedures, they are very similar to the previous one, so that we haven't spent a lot of content to explain it. Okay, then the measure results, again, okay, the model that we use to test the hypothesis. Okay, and as well as what? As well as the diagram, because this time we have three-way interaction, so that we use a floodlight analysis to do it. And this is an illustration of the results of the floodlight analysis. Okay, this is another kind of illustration with more diagrams to show the significant interaction effect. This is not the key for writing here, all right? But if you are interested in the results and then the study, and then you can read the paper, okay? But here, what I want to show you is, okay, about usually what kind of subsections we have to include in writing a paper, an experimental research paper, okay? And then finally, because we have the discussions of the three studies, eventually we still need to have a general discussion, and also we can report the theoretical contributions as well as the managerial implications as the usual way that we write the paper. Okay, finally will be limitation and future research. All right, this is actually a typical way to write the method and result section of the experimental research paper. All right, so that's almost the end of my presentation. And here I would like to highlight one thing, which is thank you, Mustafa, who is the editor of this book. And then he and also the other co-editors invite me to write a chapter, which is the publishing experimental research in hospitality and tourism, some key insights. All right, if you want to know more insights about experimental research, you're welcome to read this book chapter. Okay, I try to explain more, provide additional details related to experimental design in this chapter. All right, I hope you would like that chapter. Okay, and these are some of the references that I have used in my presentation. All right, of course, if you want to stay in touch with me, and then you're welcome to scan these QR codes for different social media account of myself. All right. So, and that's the end of my presentation. All right, thank you so much. I think I have a little bit overrun. All right, probably, yeah.
Thank you so much, Prof. Lawrence. I think the insights you shared really makes us to start experimental research immediately after your session. Especially the example you quoted, very interesting. Maybe we will spend a few times for Q&A now. So maybe I will,
sure.
In the chat, there is no questions, but I can also ask the participants if you have any questions. I think this is the time for you to start interacting with our speaker today, Lawrence. Maybe if you have any question, you can unmute your mic. Then you can ask question, or if you are not comfortable to unmute, you can post your question in the chat. We will take it from there. Okay. I can see some familiar faces. Dr. Chitra is there from Thailand.
Mustafa?
Yeah, I think.
Oh.
I just want to say something for you, Professor Lawrence, and also Professor Candy. Yeah, first of all, I just would like to thank you so much for this fruitful session and also the invitation. I am Jitlada Chaya from Mahasarkham University, Thailand. Actually, I'm from the public administration field, especially public policy. So this is very interesting for me because you use the experiment for the research, right? So for this session, I got a lot of inspiration and also methodology. And I think for me, myself, I will think carefully for the combination between the methodology in the experiment. I think it will also apply to the public sector. This is just I want to share, and very thank you for both two professors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chitra. I think there is a question from our Dr. Mustafa.
Yes, I have a question. Thank you very much, Dr. Lawrence, for this insightful sharing and talking about experimental research. I personally learned a lot from this one. But just one question. recently we can see this debate that the causal relationship between some variable effect of A on B only can be done through experimental research. And actually there is a hot debate around this topic. As I know, again, maybe my opinion is a bit different because I believe when we apply cross-sectional study, but still we apply regression-based analysis, we can test causal relationship. But just want to know your opinion. What's the reason for this statement? Why we say causal relationship only can be tested using experimental research, not cross-sectional and survey, even when we apply some regression-based analysis that refer to testing a causal relationship between variables. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks for your good question, Mustafa. Actually, yeah, experimental design is always used to examine the causal relationship. And then, yeah, you mentioned that actually if we run the regression, we have the independent variable and also dependent variable. If we can find significant effect with the coefficient, and then can we draw the conclusion that it's a causal relationship? Actually, because I always do the experimental research, why it can be used for testing causal relationship? Because of the manipulation, and also because we can control the effect of some other variables. Yeah, so that means it's very clean. What I can say is, yeah, because we will just focus on a certain independent variable, and then we try to control the effect of the other variables, because through manipulation we can do it. Yeah, so that, and then once we control all the other influences, and then only with this independent variable, manipulated variables retaining, and then we can see the effect on the dependent variable. Yeah, so that's the reason why experimental design actually is ideal for examining causal effect. But still, how to say, I can't say that this is the only approach. Yeah, the reason is, as you mentioned, probably when maybe you're referring to like the survey approach, all right? If we do survey and then we run the regression, can we still argue that this is a causal relationship? Conceptually, yes. Usually we try to argue this, right? But just because when we are doing survey, we cannot control many other variables. That's why it would be more difficult for us to conclude that this is a causal relationship. Yeah, but if we really want to use the survey approach to test a causal effect, one of the suggestions is we can use the longitudinal approach. That means we collect the data at this point of time, and then we collect the data again later. All right, but in between these two time periods, there may be something happen related to the independent variable. And then in this situation, we can still saying that we are trying to examining the causal effect. Yeah, so experimental design, why it is ideal for examining causal effect, because it can control some of the other variables which may influence the dependent variable. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Lawrence, for addressing the question by Dr. Mustafa. Is there any more questions from the participants? Okay, maybe since there is no question, just a quick question from my side, Prof. Lawrence. When you show the restaurant coupons and everything you're doing on the restaurant advertisement and marketing, for example, people who are going to be very new into the experimental research, so can you share us what are the privacy concerns involved? I think ethical approach they have to take when they are going to deal with experimental research in an organization like restaurants or hotel, when they are going to deal with maybe with the customers or probably when they want to experiment something, what are the ethical procedures to deal with the customers? I think sometimes it becomes a bit of sensitive without concerns when you are going to do some experiment with common spaces, public areas in the hotels. So can you share a bit on that part?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Very good question. Yeah, it's related to the ethical concern and also the privacy. All right. And then usually when we do a research, no matter we use experimental design or survey, as long as we have human participants, usually it depends. All right. We may need to go through the ethical committee to get the approval. Because just now in my university, we have that kind of committee. Some people will call it a short term called IRB. They have to get the approval, all right, before they start the data collection or doing the experiment. All right, so that's true, especially if you are going to do the field experiment, like as you mentioned, doing it in the restaurant. Most of the time, when we do the experiment, the participants, for example, the customers of the restaurants, they may not know they are in the experiment. Yeah, and then probably this is something that you raised. This would be a concern, right? They do not know they are a participant. Okay, they have not provided the informed consent, all right, to participate. All right, that's true. But sometimes if we tell them that actually we are doing experiment, it will also affect the results of our research. If they are alert to that, and then probably their answers may not be valid. That's the reason why sometimes we have the procedures at the end of the experimental section, which is a debriefing, which is called debriefing. All right, that means maybe the participants, they do not know they are in the experiment, but once they finish it, we have to tell them they were in the experiment. All right, and then of course at that time we may need to ask for their consent. All right, so that's why I understand that there will be a consent, but there's always give and take. If we tell them beforehand, and then the results may be biased. Okay, but still we still need to do it. All right, but maybe at the end of the experiment, because we have to follow some of the ethical procedures. Yeah.
Thank you. I totally agree with your statement. Yeah, when the moment we ask in advance, it probably make them to become an actors for the experiment, not the real
that's not the real reaction. Yeah, they try to artificially create that kind of reaction in order to be coherent with what we want them to respond, and then that will become a problem. Yeah.
Any questions from the participants?
Mr. Kandapan, if the participant don't have question, I have one more question.
Yes, Dr. Mustafa.
Sure, yeah.
Dr. Lawrence, I'm just curious that based on your experience in experimental research, is it possible to apply experimental research or a strategy for qualitative research or not?
Oh, that's an interesting
so
question.
we can apply some scenario, for example, and based on those intervention and scenario, do qualitative data collection. Is it possible, or what do you think about this?
Very, very good question. Yeah, so it's really inspiring, actually. Yeah, so based to me, because usually experimental design is used in people will call it quantitative, all right, because we use numbers to measure and to do the comparison. But for qualitative, personally, I think it's also applicable. We can also use that. Yeah, but the only difference is still we can have manipulation. Yeah, but the data will be based on the answers, the detailed answers to the questions. All right, for example, we have one manipulation, and then when we are going to ask the respondents, we are not going to ask them to answer to the measurement items. Instead, we ask them some open-end questions, all right, in order to ask them to explain as much as possible about the experience or in that manipulation. So So I think, yeah, this is possible. This is totally possible. Yeah, and probably the qualitative approach is even better if we want to have some deep insights about what people are thinking, and especially if we want to do some exploration, because we may have a manipulation. It's hard for us to hypothesize some of the consequence or the effect. And then maybe through this qualitative approach, we will be able to get some ideas. And then once we have these ideas, then we can start a second study, which is using the traditional approach, like the survey approach with the experiment. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, a very, very good question.
Thanks,
yeah.
thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Maybe if I may follow up on this question of qualitative, I was wondering how much experimental design I used to be kind of like paired with reflective interviews that could be then actually more on the qualitative line. Is it some actually frequent practice? What is your experience on this?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, just
right?
this is Dr. Elisa. Maybe you can give your intro, Dr. Elisa, very quick. Where you are from.
Dr. Elisa.
Sure. Very quick intro. Thank you. Taking a few minutes. So, yes, I'm Dr. Elisa. I'm a researcher. I'm more towards food studies. So, interested into this actually experimental design, mainly when it comes actually to understanding social interaction. And how it will influence the way we relate to food, especially. So one of actually the designs that we have adopted lately for one experimental research, is actually to have a reflective interview that follows basically the experimentation. So I was wondering, what is your experience in regards to this type of basically design where we have actually a reflective interview? I was actually making the connection between this actually reflective interview and what you were sharing about the ethical, I mean, basically the ethical dimension and securing actually the consent from the participant after experimentation. I was wondering how much actually, according to your knowledge, we can actually also go on with actually an interview that would actually reflect on the experience throughout actually the experimentation.
Oh, so you mean that actually you for the experiment you also did some interview, right? After the
yes,
experiment.
Indeed, yes,
yeah. 12 interview for your research. And then I think your interview actually is a qualitative approach, right?
Yes, indeed, yes.
I see. Yeah. So you mean is it how many interviews or something like that?
I was more actually on the line of, yes, I wonder how frequent it is actually to have actually this way to design actually the protocol where the reflective interview will follow the experiment. So we can actually potentially relate to this research and actually even actually look into actually what is published on this to further support actually the way we did proceed. It was a bit of experimental, kind of experimental, innovative design. So I'm not too sure how actually we can actually further support. So I was wondering if you could have actually some insights on this direction.
I see. That's interesting. Yeah. Again, your question is echoing Mustafa's questions. All right. For the interview, I'm not sure whether my suggestion is useful or not. Yeah. And maybe you can do a pre and post interview. Yeah, because you are combining interview and also experimental design. Because for experimental design, you may do something. I don't know what you would do in your research. All right. But before you did it, probably you can have an interview first and then trying to ask those people. And then after you complete the experiment and then you ask those people about their response or ask similar questions and then trying to compare the qualitative data that you collect before and also and after the experiment. And then probably that you will have some interesting insights, drawing from this kind of approach. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your feedback.
Thank you, Dr. Elise, for the question, and thanks
Thank you,
for Florence. Yeah. Maybe can we take two more questions? I think we got one question from Dr. Stephanie and one from Dr. Mengzu. So the question from Dr. Stephanie. Hi, Prof. Lawrence. If we collect data via Amazon M-Track, how can we make sure that it is between subject, not within subject, as the same respondent may answer experiment 1 and 2 different conditions?
Oh, okay, I see. You're asking the questions about using the M-Turk. Actually, I also use M-Turk as well. Yeah, I think many researchers would use that, especially the course is much lower, and then you can quickly collect the response. All right, for the between subject design, I'm not sure, because M-Turk actually is a crowdsourcing platform, and I would because it does not have the function for you to develop the experiment. You may need another tools. I don't know, because for me, I use Qualtrics. Yeah, Qualtrics. Yeah, so here, yeah, Qualtrics here. All right, so use Qualtrics, first of all, is to design the online experiment. And then I will link the Qualtrics to M-Turk. Okay, and then how can I do the random assignment? Actually, it's because in Qualtrics, you can you have a function for the randomization. Okay, so in the Qualtrics, and then you have 2 conditions, and then when the M-Turk participants, they open the link, then Qualtrics will randomly assign the condition to that participant, right? And then it is assumed that on M-Turk, one participant can only participate one time only. So in this case, they will not be able to attend to the second condition. But of course, there are many ways to do it. For example, I don't know, if that person has 2 accounts or even 3 accounts on M-Turk, that would be another story. Yeah. So, but anyway, if you use something like Qualtrics, and then it has the built-in function of randomization, which is very useful, which I always use as well. Yeah. Not sure if I have answered the question or not.
Thank you, Prof. Lawrence. We have one last question from Dr. Mengzu, who was also a PhD student from Taylor's and student of Dr. Mustafa and Dr. Powait. Okay, his question is, can randomization totally cancel up the effect of confounding variables? After randomization, do we still need control some variables?
Very good. Yeah. So in theory, randomization is assumed to be able to cancel those effect of the confounding variables. That's the reason why we have to use randomization. Yeah, but I think in reality, sometimes it is hard to do so, because in our world and every individuals, we have so many variables, okay, and to affect our response every day. So after randomization, do we still need to have some control variables or not? I would say that it would depend on the literature and also on the theory. Yeah, if the literature says that there are some variables or the concepts which consistently affect the dependent variable, maybe we need to include it in the measures. Okay, once we include it, as I mentioned in the presentation, then once you collect data, you can see whether this covariate or the control variables would be highly correlated to the dependent variable or not. If yes, then you have to include these control variables. If no, and then we don't need that. So when we determine whether we need to include the confounding variables or not, we have to rely on the literature. But of course, we have to be selective. We cannot include 100 variables. It's impossible. We can only include those important ones according to the literature and theory. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lawrence, for a patiently detailed explanation. With due respect, I'm sure people slowly start getting more questions. I think Prof. Lawrence already showed his QR code where you can have the extended discussion through your various questions with him. So thank you so much, Prof. Lawrence, for patiently and being very humble in addressing all the questions. So let's move on to the next agenda for today. It's a very quick summary because I think we spent a lot of time. I won't take more than including summary, all wrap up probably another 5 minutes, including a photo session. Yeah, I think when Prof. Lawrence started, really he started with the inspiration story of Nobel Prize winner, who is Madam Yu Tu, 2015. And he highly highlighted what makes him special. I think testing on herself, the safety of the medicine. And also earlier when he started his sharing, how he also experiment. I think it starts from his house. I think he start his experiment even from the house, not really only in the experimental space. I think what we can understand from Prof. Lawrence, I think people who are in the experimental research, they view everything in a very different way of perceptions. Very interesting. And later he started going through this different content, what he is going to share from the insight, fundamentals, critical review. The more interesting part started once he went to the manipulation stages of putting how the one approach, taking an hotels.com as an example with the talk. I think it was very interesting the way he took the example, hotels.com, then later how it has come to the exclusiveness and how it integrated with the savings, how the mediation effects can be brought in with 2 and 2 approach. I think it's all very, very new, interesting way of learning for us. For me, especially a lot of learning. And later he covered about the sample size, how it is different, especially even though it's a quantitative, but going experimental research, what is the minimum sample size using the G power, and also he given his example 30 as a good example with putting the different scenarios. The most interesting part came when he started explaining the manipulations on the approaches, starting from a scenario basis, then a priming basis, how the random assignment has done, condition 1, 2. I think that was a very insightful part, taking the restaurants as an example, which everybody can easily relate and understand. Thank you so much for that. And later, he also explained a bit about the field and the lab, how it is different in terms of observational issues and implications. And he touched his particular research area where he published on the experimental research. Few examples. Thanks for sharing your work so that people can read and get more insights of your own sharing. And I think thank you so much for putting everything in a different way. Even your sharing itself, it was very interactive. Keep everyone's eyes focused on the screen alone. We cannot move around. I think it was the way you delivered and the content you used, especially the explanation with using the diagrammatic, is very interesting. So thank you so much, Prof. Lawrence, once again, for sparing your time, putting all your valuable insights and your research expertise to all this. We have around only 57 was there, slowly coming down, but there are a lot of people will be watching our YouTube channels. And this is where we get a lot of probably in future you'll get more questions, more friend requests in LinkedIn and your other social medias. So let us do a photo session. Before that, I will quickly go through this. We do have our own journal. People who are attending, if you are interested to publish your work, I think probably CRiT also will start focusing to receive more experimental research article. Please feel free to submit your paper. This is a Q4 Scopus journal, which we are slowly growing, which we focus more on innovation and especially from hospitality and tourism. And people who want to know more about CRiT, what CRiT does, or you are looking for any collaboration with the CRiT. So what we do is basically joint research papers, book chapters, international research grant collaborations, joint events, but everything focused on tourism, hospitality, and SDGs. Especially, we have a very strong focus, vision, and mission, which was designed by our CRiT director, Dr. Mustafa, and the whole associate members of CRiT. And we do postgraduate research networking, community projects, and a lot of other consultation projects. We believe that it's very important to be in the world of culture of care and collaboration. So you can scan this QR code to go direct to our CRiT website. So thank you so much. Let's go to the photo session. Let me stop sharing. I kindly request all the participants who are still here to open your cameras to show your wonderful smile on your face with your. I can still see some of them are still in the previous webinars. Jessica, I can see your backdrop with the previous webinar with PSU Thailand. And Prof. Lawrence, just give us a few minutes, maybe a few seconds for everyone to open their cameras.